My boyfriend abandoned me at a party and let them abuse me. The next day, I woke up in hospital, incomplete. But when I remembered what he had done to me, I decided to get revenge in the worst possible way, where it would hurt him most. The air was thick with laughter, music, and the unmistakable aroma of spilled alcohol. The lights flickered intermittently, creating an atmosphere of revelry and chaos. Emma walked cautiously through the crowd, feeling out of place. She had never been a party person, especially not the kind that ended with strangers embracing in drunken stupors. But that night she had agreed because James, her boyfriend, had insisted too much. Just one night, he had said hours earlier with a seductive smile. You need to relax. Emma had given in more to please him than out of genuine excitement. Sometimes she felt that James dragged her into worlds where she didn't fit, but he always convinced her with his charisma and those words loaded with empty promises. Just this once, she had repeated to herself in front of the mirror while getting ready. The place was full of young people dancing and laughing as if their lives depended on that moment. James took her hand and led her to a group of mates drinking near the bar. Here's the queen of the night, shouted one of them, raising his glass. Emma smiled uncomfortably while James handed her a glass with a clear liquid and a slice of lime. I don't drink, she said, reminding him of what she always said. James winked at her and brought the glass closer. Just this once. Nothing's going to happen. Trust me. James's mates began to chant and encourage her, making Emma feel like all eyes were on her. She felt trapped. She didn't want to be the boring one of the night. With a resigned sigh, she took the glass and drank it all in one gulp. That's it, James shouted, hugging her tightly while the group applauded. The liquid burned her throat, but she forced herself to smile. She thought one would be enough, but soon another glass arrived, and then another. Emma stopped counting after the third. Her vision began to distort, and the lights of the place transformed into colored blobs spinning without sense. I feel strange, she mumbled, staggering. James held her by the waist and whispered in her ear, Easy, love. Let's go outside for some fresh air. Emma nodded, trusting his words blindly. She felt them guiding her toward the exit, but her steps were clumsy, and the world felt increasingly distant. I don't want to continue, she said with a slurred voice. I want to go home. James didn't respond. Someone else took her by the other side, and then everything went black. The first sound she heard was the intermittent noise of a machine. Emma slowly opened her eyes with a feeling of emptiness and a sharp pain in her abdomen. The ceiling light blinded her for a moment. When her vision cleared, she realized she was in a hospital bed. What? She murmured, feeling her throat dry. A nurse approached with a worried expression. Emma, relax. You're in hospital. You're safe. Emma tried to sit up, but a sharp pain forced her to lie back down. She looked down and saw a thick bandage around her abdomen. What happened to me? She asked with a broken voice. The nurse hesitated before responding. They found you unconscious in the street. Someone called an ambulance. When you arrived, the doctors discovered that you'd had surgery. Someone removed one of your kidneys. The words hit like a bucket of ice water. Emma felt the air leave her lungs. That can't be, she whispered, horrified. No. The door burst open, and her mother entered with a pale face and eyes red from crying. My girl, she screamed, running toward her to embrace her carefully. Emma broke down, feeling the warmth of her mother's arms. Mom, they did something horrible to me. I know, darling, I know, her mother replied between sobs. But I'm here. We're going to find out who did this to you. Hours later, the room remained immersed in a heavy atmosphere. Emma lay back while her mother spoke with the police who had arrived to take the report. Does she have enemies? Anyone who might have threatened her, asked one of the officers. Emma's mother shook her head. My daughter is a quiet person. She never gets into trouble. We're going to review the security cameras in the area and see what we can find, added the other officer. We know this type of crime is usually planned. Emma could barely hear the conversation. Her mind was trapped in the memory of the party, in the faces of James's mates, and in the moment when everything began to blur. The door opened again, and James entered with his face full of concern. He wore a wrinkled jacket, and his hands were trembling. I can't believe what happened to you, he said while advancing toward the bed. Are you all right? Emma looked at him fixedly, trying to find sincerity in his eyes. I don't know if I'm all right, she replied quietly. I feel broken, James. I can't remember almost anything from that night. James sat next to her and took her hand gently. We're going to get through this together. I promise you. Emma's mother watched him with suspicion, as if something in James's attitude didn't fit. Where were you when they found my daughter? She asked without hiding her distrust. James looked up and cleared his throat. I went to look for her in the loo and couldn't find her. I asked several people and thought she'd left before me. I never imagined that this. Emma's mother pressed her lips and crossed her arms. I hope you're telling the truth, because if I find out you're hiding something, I'll be the first to report you. James nodded, visibly nervous. Emma closed her eyes, trying to process everything that was happening. She wanted to believe James, wanted to think he wasn't capable of something so cruel, but a voice inside whispered that there was something that didn't add up. Days passed, and the investigation began to advance. The police reviewed security cameras and interviewed witnesses from the party. James's mates were questioned, but they all seemed to have solid alibis. Meanwhile, Emma continued recovering both physically and emotionally. Every time she looked in the mirror and saw the scar on her abdomen, she felt that a part of her had been stolen forever. Her best friend Charlotte visited constantly, bringing books and reminding her she wasn't alone. We're going to find the truth, Em, whatever it takes, Charlotte assured her. Emma nodded, grateful for her friend's unconditional support. But deep down, there was something she couldn't ignore. Part of her knew the betrayal had come from someone close. And if the truth came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. The story was far from over, and when the truth arrived, it would be devastating. The days in hospital turned into weeks. Emma had regained some color in her face, and although her body was gradually strengthening, her mind remained trapped in a tangle of unanswered questions. The police investigation progressed slowly. Officers had reviewed cameras, questioned witnesses, and gathered information, but nothing seemed to point to a clear culprit. Every time one of the investigators called or visited, Emma held her breath, hoping for news that would give her some clarity. But she always received the same response: "We're doing everything possible." After so many empty promises, her patience was wearing thin. One afternoon, while the sun filtered through the window and the sound of trolley wheels echoed through the corridors, Charlotte entered the room with a determined expression. She carried a folder in her hand and a look that Emma recognized instantly. It was the look of someone about to risk everything. "Emma, we can't keep waiting," Charlotte said while placing the folder on the table. "The police aren't going to find anything if we keep depending only on them." Emma looked at her attentively, feeling a slight tremor in her hands. "What do you mean?" Charlotte leaned forward and lowered her voice as if the weight of what she was about to say could break into 1,000 pieces if anyone else heard. "I'm going to help you discover who did this, and we're going to start with someone no one has wanted to point the finger at. James." The name fell like a bomb in the room. Emma felt her heart racing and her breathing becoming heavier. "James," she repeated as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why do you say that?" Charlotte opened the folder and showed her some documents she had printed. "I've been investigating, looking for clues on social media, reviewing photos from parties he went to before meeting you. There's something he hasn't told you." Emma frowned, increasingly uneasy. "What are you talking about?" Charlotte took a deep breath before continuing. "A few days ago, I saw a comment on an old post of James's, something that mentioned his mother. At first, I didn't pay attention, but I kept digging. I discovered that his mom has been ill for months. She's seriously ill, and lives in another city." Silence filled the room. Emma felt a chill run through her body. The idea that James could be hiding something so important was devastating, but a small voice inside whispered that there was more behind that story. "Why didn't he tell me anything?" she asked in a whisper. "Why didn't he trust me?" Charlotte moved closer and took her hand firmly. "That's what we're going to find out." 2 days later, Emma was discharged from hospital. Although she still felt weak, the determination in her gaze was indisputable. She wasn't going to wait for more answers sitting down. She needed to face the truth, even if it hurt. Charlotte hired a car, and together they set off on the journey to the city where James's mother lived. During the journey, silence was present almost the entire time. Emma looked out the window, feeling anxiety accumulate in her chest. Charlotte respected her silence, but looked at her sideways more than once, worried about what might happen when they arrived. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," she finally said, breaking the silence. Emma pressed her lips and shook her head. "I'm not going to keep living with doubts, Charlotte. I need to know why he hid something so important from me." Charlotte nodded and continued driving. Finally, after several hours, they arrived at a quiet neighborhood with modest houses and well-tended gardens. Charlotte parked in front of a house painted white with large windows and closed curtains. Emma got out of the car, with a knot in her stomach. Her breathing was irregular and her hands trembled. She approached the door and knocked gently. There was no response. She knocked again, this time harder. The door opened slowly, and there was James. He wore a wrinkled shirt, and his face was marked by deep dark circles. The surprise in his eyes was evident, but what hurt Emma most was the guilt she recognized in his gaze. "Emma," he murmured, as if pronouncing her name was a painful act. Emma looked at him fixedly, feeling rage and sadness mixing inside her. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" she asked without looking away. "Why did you hide from me that your mom was dying?" James looked down and stepped aside to let them in. Charlotte remained at the entrance, watching the scene cautiously. Emma entered and saw an elderly woman in a bed in the living room, connected to several tubes and breathing with difficulty. James closed the door and sat in an armchair, not knowing how to begin explaining. "I didn't want you to know," he finally said. "I didn't want you to carry my desperation." Emma crossed her arms, trying to stay calm. "And what did you do, James? Because everything points to you using me and destroying my life." James looked up, and tears began to flow from his eyes. "It wasn't me," he whispered, "but I did know what could happen, and I didn't do anything to stop it." Emma felt the ground disappearing under her feet. She took a step back and leaned against the wall to avoid falling. "What are you saying?" she asked with a broken voice. James stood up suddenly and put his hands to his hair. "The only way to save her was to get a donor. And when they told me there was no more time, I accepted help from someone who promised to get what we needed. I knew there was a price, but I didn't know what it implied until it was too late." Emma closed her eyes, letting tears run down her cheeks. "That was me." James approached her, but Emma raised a hand to stop him. "Don't you dare touch me," she said with a mixture of rage and pain. "I can't believe you did this to me. You didn't just take something from me. You took away trust, love, everything." "I know," James replied with a broken voice. "I know, but believe me, I've been living in hell ever since." Emma shook her head, feeling devastated. "Hell isn't what you lived. It's what you left me with. Because I was the one who woke up alone, broken, while you continued with your life." The room fell silent. Charlotte, from the door, had tears in her eyes seeing her friend so destroyed. James sat back down and rested his elbows on his knees, defeated. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I never wanted you to end up like this. All I did was save my mom." Emma looked at him one last time, feeling the weight of the whole truth suffocating her. "I'm not going to forgive you, James, but I'm also not going to stay trapped in this pain. I'm going to heal, with or without answers. And you'll have to live with this for the rest of your life." Without saying anything more, Emma turned and left the house with firm steps. Charlotte followed her, leaving James alone with his guilt and his ghosts. When they reached the car, Emma let herself fall into the seat and breathed deeply. "I faced him, and I survived," she said with a trembling but determined voice. Charlotte looked at her with admiration. "You did it, Em. You did it." As the car drove away from the neighborhood, Emma felt something new in her chest. It wasn't happiness, but it was a beginning. It was the certainty that although life had taken something valuable from her, it had also given her the opportunity to rebuild herself. The story hadn't ended, but Emma was ready to write the next chapter. The sun was slowly setting on the horizon as Emma and Charlotte returned to the city. The journey passed in strange silence, broken only by the constant murmur of the engine and the occasional noise of passing cars. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the road, but her mind remained trapped in every word from James, in the devastating confession that had changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Charlotte asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Emma took a few seconds before responding. "I'm thinking about how I'm going to move forward after this. I feel like everything I was before has disappeared, and I don't know how to rebuild myself," she replied softly but loaded with anguish. Charlotte kept one hand on the wheel, and with the other squeezed her arm affectionately. "You've already started, Em. You've faced the truth, even though it hurt. That's the first step to getting out of the darkness." Emma sighed and rested her head against the window. "It hurts so much to know that someone I loved was capable of destroying me to save someone else. Everything we built together was a lie." Charlotte frowned and took a deep breath. "I don't think it was a lie. I think James loved you, but his love wasn't strong enough to choose you. And that's the problem, Em. It's not your fault that he was selfish." Charlotte's words hit deep. She knew her friend was right, but accepting that truth didn't make the pain disappear. Do you think I'll ever be able to forgive him? Emma asked in a whisper. Charlotte turned her head to look at her. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you. And it will come when you're ready, not before. Emma closed her eyes, letting her friend's words float in the air like a bomb that still needed time to heal. Days passed slowly back in the city. Emma tried to resume her routine, but every small gesture reminded her of what had happened. The scar on her abdomen remained an open wound, not just on her skin, but in her soul. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling she was still in that cold hospital room, alone and broken. Charlotte visited frequently, bringing homemade food and keeping her busy with trivial conversations. But there were moments when the sadness was so heavy that no distraction worked. One morning, while Emma was making coffee, her mother entered the flat without warning. She had a furrowed brow and a worried expression. "Darling, you can't keep shut away like this," her mother said while placing a bouquet of flowers on the table. "This isn't living." Emma gave her a tired look. "I'm not shut away, Mum. I'm trying to exist." Emma's mother approached and caressed her face tenderly. "You have every right to feel this way, but you can't let this consume you, because if you do, then they win." Emma felt a lump in her throat. She knew her mother was right, but words were easier to say than to assimilate. "I don't know how to do it," she confessed with tears in her eyes. "How do I stop feeling broken?" Her mother hugged her tightly and whispered in her ear, "You start by accepting that it's not your fault, and then you give yourself time to learn to live again." Emma sank into that embrace, letting herself be comforted like when she was a child and problems seemed smaller under the warmth of her mother's arms. A few weeks later, Charlotte arrived at the flat with a folder in her hands and a smile on her lips. "I have something for you," she announced while placing the folder on the table. Emma frowned and opened it curiously. Inside were papers from an organization that helped victims of traumatic situations through support programs and community projects. "I want you to read this and think about it. It's a volunteer program for people who have been through difficult times. They help others heal while finding their own healing in the process." Emma turned the pages slowly, absorbing the information. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked softly. Charlotte sat in front of her and took her hands. "Because I know you're strong, even though you don't believe it yet. And helping others might be the way you find a new reason to get up every morning." Emma let the idea float in her mind. She had spent so long feeling trapped in her own pain that the idea of going out and doing something for others seemed strange, but also encouraging. "You don't have to decide now," Charlotte added. "I just want you to think about it." Emma closed the folder and nodded. "I'll think about it." The following days, Emma dedicated time to reflecting on Charlotte's proposal. She remembered the nights when she had wished to have someone who truly understood her, someone who could share her burden and help her find meaning in the midst of chaos. Now, maybe she could be that person for others. One afternoon, while watching the sunset from her balcony, she made a decision. She got up, went to the desk, and looked for the contact number of the support program. She dialed and waited with her heart beating strongly. "Hello, I'm calling to get more information about the volunteer program," she said with a firm voice. The voice on the other end was kind and warm. They explained the details and arranged a meeting for the following week. When she hung up, Emma felt a mixture of nerves and hope. It was the first time in a long while that she felt she was taking a step in the right direction. The first day at the foundation was both exciting and terrifying. The room was full of people of different ages, all with stories marked by adversity. Emma felt she wasn't the only one carrying an invisible scar. During the first session, she introduced herself to the group. "My name's Emma, and a few months ago I was betrayed in the cruelest way by someone I trusted. They took something from me that I can never recover. But I'm here because I don't want that to define me. I want to be something more than a victim." The words resonated in the room. Some group members looked at her with admiration, while others nodded silently, feeling identified. After the meeting, a young woman approached Emma with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story. I needed to hear it. You made me feel like I'm not alone." Emma felt a lump in her throat, but this time it wasn't from sadness but from gratitude. "You're not alone either," she replied with a sincere smile. Over time, Emma became a key piece of the support program. She shared her experience bravely and listened to others' stories with an open heart. Each session was one more step towards her own healing. James never looked for her again. She learned through Charlotte that his mother had died shortly after that encounter, and that he had disappeared from the city. Emma felt a mixture of sadness and relief. She had learned that some goodbyes, although painful, were necessary to close wounds. One night, while returning home after a meeting at the foundation, Emma stopped in a park and observed the stars. The air was fresh, and the sky was clear. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling how the weight of the last months was gradually dissipating. For the first time in a long while, she felt she could look forward without fear. "I'm stronger than I thought," she murmured with a serene smile. And she was. She had learned to be reborn among the ruins, to build something beautiful in the midst of chaos. Emma was no longer the woman who had woken up alone in a hospital, broken and lost. She was someone new, someone who had chosen life despite everything. Her story of pain had become her greatest strength. On the other side of the city, James looked at his reflection in the broken mirror of the small bathroom where he lived. His face was pale, with sunken cheeks and unkempt beard covering his jaw. The eyes observing him from the mirror didn't seem like his own. They were the eyes of a defeated man, a man who had lost everything that gave meaning to his life. "Life is cruel," he murmured while running a hand over his face, feeling the burn of dried tears. "It took everything from me." The echo of his own voice in the empty room returned the only truth that kept him awake each night. His mother had died, and Emma had left him. Since the day he saw Emma leave his house with her voice trembling with fury and sadness, James felt something inside him break forever. There was no way to turn back time, to undo his decisions, to give Emma back the trust he had destroyed. But his mother's death had been the final blow. That woman who had been his refuge throughout his life was no longer there. And now he wandered through life like a soul in torment. He spent his days locked up, immersed in his dark thoughts. He barely ate, barely slept. The weight of guilt crushed him, suffocated him. "I failed Mom. And I lost her too," he whispered at night, as if his mother could hear him from some distant place. The memory of Emma became more painful with each dawn. The image of her eyes full of tears and her voice, when she told him she wouldn't forgive him, tormented him without rest. One morning, after weeks of abandonment and solitude, James got up with a new idea that crossed his mind like lightning. "I have to see her. I have to try," he said to himself while looking for clean clothes among the wrinkled garments on the floor. He stopped in front of the mirror and observed himself carefully. He couldn't present himself to Emma as the destroyed man he was. He knew that if he wanted to even talk to her, he needed to show her something more than his repentance. He had to show her there was still something worthy in him. The journey to Emma's flat was longer than he remembered. Every traffic light, every corner reminded him of the happy memories they shared. James walked to the building with his heart beating strongly in his chest. When he reached the door, he took a breath and knocked with his knuckles. The seconds seemed eternal until the door opened. Emma appeared with an expression of surprise that quickly transformed into coldness. "What are you doing here?" she asked with no intention of inviting him in. James looked down and breathed deeply before responding. "I need to talk to you, Em. I need you to listen to me." Emma tightened her jaw and crossed her arms as if trying to protect herself from something invisible. "I don't think we have anything more to say to each other, James." The rejection was like a dagger to his chest, but James didn't give up. He looked up and spoke with the most serene voice he could find. "Please, just give me a few minutes. After that, if you still don't want to see me, I'll leave and won't bother you again." Emma remained silent for a few moments that seemed interminable. Finally, she let out a sigh and stepped aside to let him pass. "5 minutes," she said curtly. "Just 5 minutes." James nodded and entered cautiously, feeling how the air became denser in the small space. Emma sat on the sofa, looking at him with eyes full of reserves and pain. "Speak," she said without beating around the bush. James sat in front of her with intertwined hands and downcast gaze. It took him a moment to gather the strength to begin. "I lost my mother," he began with a muted voice. "What I most feared in life happened, and I couldn't save her." Emma maintained her serious expression, although something inside her stirred upon hearing those words. "I'm sorry, but you can't come here looking for comfort for something you created yourself, James. Not after what you did." James nodded slowly, accepting the blow without trying to defend himself. I know I was a coward, selfish, but I want you to understand something," he said while looking directly into her eyes. "I didn't do it because I didn't love you. I did it because my love for my mother blinded me completely. She was all I had left in life, and when I saw her fading day after day, I felt I would do whatever was necessary, even something unforgivable, to save her." Emma felt her defenses beginning to waver, but she forced herself to stay calm. And what about what I lost, James? You took something from me that I can never recover. You stole my security, trust, peace of mind. And all for a decision you made without even asking me. James closed his eyes for a moment, feeling tears burning in his throat. You're right. I failed you in the worst way. But I want you to know that I would give anything to change what I did. Emma got up and began walking around the room, trying to contain the emotions swirling in her chest. You can't change the past, James. And you can't come here looking for redemption, expecting me to heal your wounds. James also stood up with glassy eyes and a broken voice. I'm not looking for you to save me, Em. I just want you to understand. A son who loves his mother does anything to save her. He would give his soul if necessary. Emma stopped and looked at him with a mixture of fury and sadness. And what about what I loved? Wasn't it your responsibility to protect me too? Silence settled between them like a wall. James knew there was no answer that could alleviate Emma's pain. I don't expect you to forgive me today. Maybe you never will. But I want you to know that I loved you, and I'll always love you, even though I don't deserve you to believe me. Emma felt tears beginning to flow from her eyes without being able to contain them. James's words pierced through every layer of rage and sadness she had built to protect herself. You broke me, James, and you left me alone at my worst moment. James took a step towards her, but stopped, respecting the distance. I know, and I'm sorry with every part of my being. But I didn't come here just for me. I came because I want you to find peace too, because you deserve to be happy, even if it's far from me. James's words resonated forcefully in Emma's heart. She knew he was being sincere, but she also knew forgiveness wasn't something she could give immediately. She remained silent for a few seconds and then breathed deeply. I don't know if I can forgive you now, but I want to try. Not for you, but for me. James looked at her surprised, with tears sliding down his cheeks. Thank you. Thank you for trying. Emma nodded, with a broken voice. But this doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was before. There are things love can't repair, James. And you and I are one of those things. James nodded, understanding that accepting his errors didn't come with a reward. I just want you to find your way, to find happiness. Emma let out a sigh and looked at him one last time before opening the door. And you too, James. I hope you find a new purpose, something that helps you keep living. James left the house with his heart destroyed, but with the feeling of having said everything he carried inside. Emma closed the door. And although tears still ran down her cheeks, she felt a strange relief. She hadn't repaired the past, but she had taken one more step towards her healing. She knew the road would be long, but now she had something she didn't have before, the certainty that she could close doors without being trapped in pain. She had learned to look at the future without fear and understand that her strength didn't depend on anyone else. The love James had offered her had come too late, but the self-love she was learning to build was the foundation of her new life. David appeared behind her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You haven't slept at all, he asked tenderly. Emma shook her head without looking away from the floor. I can't. I keep hearing the doctor's words over and over again. David sighed and sat in front of her, taking her hands carefully. We're in this together. You know that, right? Emma looked up and gazed at him with eyes full of tears. My brother has leukemia, and if we don't find a compatible donor soon, he might not survive. Everything we've built, David feels so fragile now. David hugged her, pressing her against his chest. You're not alone, and we're going to find a solution. Emma closed her eyes and let herself be enveloped by that embrace. For a few seconds, David's warmth managed to calm the fear that consumed her. But deep down, she knew there was a decision she had to make, no matter how difficult it was. Hours later, Emma was in the hospital, sitting next to her brother's bed. Thomas was only 22 years old, but the diagnosis had made him seem more fragile than she remembered. His skin was pale, and his eyes, which used to be bright and full of life, now looked dim. Thomas smiled slightly upon seeing her. Did you bring me contraband food? Because if it's soup again, I'm banning you from entering. Emma laughed through tears and stroked his head. I didn't bring food, but I brought a promise. I'm not going to give up until I find you a donor. Thomas squinted and looked at her seriously. Emma, you don't have to do all this alone. I don't want you to put yourself in danger or blame yourself if things don't go as expected. Emma pressed her lips and shook her head. You're my brother, my best friend. There's no world where I wouldn't fight for you. Thomas looked at her tenderly and shrugged. If anyone can do it, it's you. Emma smiled, but inside she felt the weight of what she was about to do. After speaking with the doctors and confirming the results, Emma came to an inevitable conclusion. James was the only one with a blood type compatible with Thomas. It was a cruel irony of fate, but she knew what she had to do. This time there would be no lies or deceptions, only honesty. When David returned home and saw the expression on Emma's face, he understood instantly. "You're going to look for him, aren't you?" he asked with a hint of concern in his voice. Emma nodded firmly. "It's the only option I have. But this time, it will be different. I'm going to ask for help. I'm not going to take anything from him." David sighed and took her hands. "I trust you, and if he hurts you again, I won't be far away." Emma approached and kissed him gently. "Thank you, but this is a fight I have to face myself." The next day was long. Emma searched for information about James's whereabouts and discovered he was still living in a modest flat in a quiet suburb outside the city. She dressed in simple clothes and pulled back her hair, breathing deeply before leaving the house. When she arrived at the building, she felt memories hitting her like a gust of icy wind. She climbed the stairs with slow steps and reached James's door. She hesitated for an instant before knocking. The door opened, and James appeared with an expression of surprise. He had lost weight, and his gaze seemed even more tired than the last time they had seen each other. "Emma," he said, as if he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Emma pressed her hands together in an attempt to calm her nerves. "Hello, James. May I come in?" James nodded and stepped aside to let her enter. The atmosphere was permeated with an aroma of coffee and old books. Emma looked around, noticing how everything in his home seemed to reflect the abandonment he himself had suffered. "What are you doing here?" James asked while sitting in a chair, visibly bewildered. Emma remained standing and looked directly into his eyes. "I need your help." James frowned and leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." "Anything." Emma breathed deeply before responding. "My brother Thomas has leukemia. He needs an urgent transfusion, and you're the only compatible one." The silence in the room became heavy. James looked down and pressed his hands together. "Me?" he asked quietly. "You want me to help him?" Emma nodded, with eyes full of tears. "I'm not going to deceive you or manipulate you. I'm just asking you to help me save my brother. I understand if you say no, but I had to come and ask you this honestly." James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. When he opened them again, his gaze was full of conflicted emotions. "Emma," he murmured with a trembling voice. "This is like a second chance, isn't it?" Emma looked at him, surprised. "I don't know. I just know my brother deserves to live." James stood up and approached slowly. "I'll do it. Not because I want to redeem myself, but because I understand what it means to love someone so much you'd do anything to save them." Emma felt her legs trembling. Tears began to fall without her being able to contain them. "Thank you. You don't know what this means to me." James put a hand on her shoulder and gave her a sad smile. "Maybe I do know." The next day, James presented himself at the hospital to perform the transfusion. The procedure was quick and effective. The doctors explained that the samples were compatible and that the donation had been successful. Emma watched everything from the other side of the glass, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. When James came out, still somewhat weak but conscious, Emma was waiting with a bottle of water in her hand. "How do you feel?" she asked worriedly. James smiled tiredly. "A bit dizzy, but I'm fine." Emma helped him sit on a bench in the corridor and offered him the bottle. "Thank you for doing this," she said with her voice loaded with emotion. "I don't know how I'll be able to thank you." James looked at her and shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just want you to know that I don't regret helping." Emma looked at him silently for a moment before taking his hand and squeezing it gently. "Despite everything, I'll always wish you find peace, James." James nodded with eyes full of tears. "The same for you, Emma." That night, Emma returned home with a lighter heart. David received her with a hug and a smile. "Did everything go well?" Emma nodded and curled up in his arms. "James did it, and Thomas is going to have another chance." David kissed her head and held her in silence. He knew Emma had closed an important cycle in her life. She had chosen the path of forgiveness and honesty, demonstrating that even in the midst of pain, there was still room for love and hope. Emma had learned that life was unpredictable, but she had also learned that acts of kindness could change everything. Now she was ready to write a new chapter, one in which self-love and courage would continue to be her greatest strengths. Days later, the night was serene, and the city lights flickered like distant stars. Emma watched the sky from the hospital window with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion in her eyes. Thomas slept peacefully in the bed with an expression of tranquility she hadn't seen in months. The doctor had confirmed that the transfusion had been successful and that his body was responding well to treatment. It was the first time in a long while she felt they could breathe without fear. David approached silently and handed her a cup of coffee. Emma smiled and accepted the gesture with a slight sigh. "It's incredible how life can change in a matter of weeks," she said, turning toward David with a soft voice. David looked at her tenderly. "Yes, but what's most incredible is how you stayed strong at every step, even when life gave you reasons to give up." Emma looked down at the cup, letting the coffee's warmth comfort her hands. "Sometimes I think if someone had told me everything that was going to happen years ago, I wouldn't have believed I could bear it." David took one of her hands and squeezed it gently. "But you did it, and that's what matters. You didn't just survive, you fought and rebuilt your life." Emma looked up and gazed into his eyes, feeling a mixture of love and relief at seeing him there, being her constant support. It had been a long road, and although she knew there were still many battles ahead, she also knew she wasn't alone. The days in the hospital became a routine of care, medical visits, and chats with Thomas, who despite his condition maintained his sense of humor intact. "When I get out of here, the first thing I'll do is eat a giant burger," Thomas would say with a mischievous smile. Emma would laugh while adjusting the pillows. "You'll have to wait until the doctor approves it, but I promise I'll bring it to you myself." Thomas would look at her tenderly, and something deeper was reflected in his eyes. "Thank you for not giving up, Em. I know you did difficult things, and I also know who it was that saved me." Emma felt a knot in her throat and looked away for a moment. "The important thing is that you're alive." "I know, but I also know you had to face James to achieve it. And that's not just anything." Emma sighed and sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes, it was difficult, but James did the right thing. For the first time, there were no lies, just an honest decision." Thomas nodded and gave her a calm smile. "That says a lot about both of you." After several weeks of treatment, the long-awaited day arrived when the doctors announced that Thomas could return home. Emma felt relief filling every corner of her being. They prepared everything carefully, and when they crossed the hospital door, the fresh air felt like a promise of a new beginning. David was waiting outside by the car with an expression of pure happiness. "Ready to return to real life?" he asked with a smile while opening the car door. Thomas raised his arms as if he were a champion. "I'm more than ready." Emma laughed while helping her brother sit comfortably. "Easy, champion. The important thing is we do it step by step." The following days were filled with laughter, family meals, and long conversations. Thomas gradually regained strength, and the flat felt like a home full of life again. Emma, however, knew there was a pending matter still circling her mind. One afternoon, while David and Thomas played cards in the living room, Emma got up, took her jacket, and looked at David with a meaningful gesture. "I'm going out for a moment." David looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and understanding. "Everything all right?" Emma nodded and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "Everything's fine, but I need to close something definitively." David squeezed her hand tenderly. "Go peacefully. We'll wait for you here." Emma arrived at the park where she had agreed to meet James. She had exchanged a few brief messages after Thomas's recovery, and she knew this encounter was necessary. Upon seeing him sitting on a bench with his hands intertwined and his gaze lost in the landscape, she felt an echo of what they once were, but also a reminder of how much they both had changed. She approached slowly and sat beside him. James looked at her and gave her a nostalgic smile. "I'm glad you came." Emma observed him and nodded. "I couldn't leave things like this. I wanted to talk to you face to face." James breathed deeply before speaking. "I know there are still things that don't have answers, and that my repentance doesn't change anything. But I want you to know that what I did for Thomas wasn't to redeem myself, but because I understood what it means to be honest with oneself." Emma looked at him with a mixture of sadness and peace in her eyes. "I know, and although there are still scars that won't disappear, I think we learned something important. That truth, even when it hurts, is always better than deception." James nodded and smiled sadly. "Thomas is strong, just like you." Emma breathed deeply and let the air fill her lungs before speaking. "I want to tell you something. I don't hate you, James. I learned that hatred only kept me chained to the past. And although we can't go back to being who we were, I wish you find peace and build something new." James's eyes filled with tears as he nodded slowly. "Thank you, Em. I think that's the most important thing I could hear." Emma gave him one last serene look before standing up. "Take care of yourself, James." He watched her walk away, feeling that for the first time in a long while, his heart was beginning to heal. He stayed in the park contemplating the sky, while the echo of Emma's words reminded him that although life had taken much from him, he could still find a new purpose. When Emma arrived home, David received her with a warm smile and a long hug. "How did it go?" he asked while observing her attentively. Emma smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "I closed a door, and I feel at peace." David kissed her forehead and looked at her with admiration. "That's all that matters." Thomas from the living room raised the cards and shouted, "Come on, I need someone to help me beat David." Emma and David laughed while joining the table. The home filled with laughter and jokes, a reflection that life, with all its turns and scars, could still be beautiful. Emma knew it had been a long road, but she also knew she had found the peace she had searched for so long. Her story of pain had evolved into a story of courage and self-love, and while looking at her brother and the man she loved, she understood something fundamental. Life, with all its trials, always gave space for new beginnings. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to leave me a comment about what you felt while listening to it. And if you've been through a similar situation of betrayal, I'd love for you to share your valuable opinion. I'd feel very honored if you gave me a like, shared the video with a friend or family member, and subscribed to the channel. Don't miss the next surprising story that's appearing on your screen right now. We have guaranteed entertainment exclusively for you. See you in the next video.